Joining us more now to talk about this is Norman Young. He's a senior equity analyst at Morningstar in Chicago. Norman, thanks for joining us tonight.
Thanks so much for having me.
So Norman, I want to start off by asking you, a lot of tech companies are now starting to realize that perhaps they're going to be losing a lot of business in other countries. What do you think some of these companies can do to try and secure or hold on to that business?
Yeah, that's a good question. So what's happened really is, the allegations of spying or whatnot really just kind of brings into stark relief what a lot of people had already been worried about, whether it's a government entity or it's hackers from other countries or hackers within your borders. Privacy and security have always been kind of the big concerns with a lot of these cloud computing companies. So what they're being forced to do now is kind of work on kind of a framework to protect their customers, but by kind of increasing transparency, figuring out where the legal frameworks lie, and just figuring out what the customers want and need. So a lot of that is going to depend on the jurisdiction, depending on the country.
Norman, do you think a lot of these tech companies were coerced into working with the U.S. government and cooperating? Or do you think that a lot of them were able to take a stance and say, no, we're not going to do this, it's going to hurt our bottom line? What are your thoughts?
Well, from what I understand, what happened was, look, if they were served with legal documents, they probably were compelled to respond to them. And from what it sounds like, they did it kind of reluctantly, but they did what they had to do legally. And then as far as the other allegations are concerned, look, it sounds like they really didn't know what some of those other things were happening, and they seem just as outraged as anyone else.
Seems like it definitely came as a surprise to them. Now, Norman, Google has spent a lot of money on cloud computing. Do you think that Google could potentially see that being lost as an investment?
Probably not, and let me caveat that. Look, they're spending a lot of cloud computing anyways. They need to. Much of what they produce, software-wise, kind of resides in the cloud anyway. So all of this infrastructure spending is necessary. What's going to happen is it's probably going to become more of a logistical or a location issue. As was mentioned in the report just now, a lot of companies or a lot of countries are just kind of mandating that data centers and data needs to reside within their borders. That's fine. A lot of these data centers are pretty much spread out around the world anyway, so it just becomes a question of what the customer demands and what Google can do to help them out.
Now, with the latest sort of NSA revelations, do you think that we could see other business opportunities opening up to some of these tech companies?
Oh, definitely. So what you're seeing now is kind of anytime you have either a regulatory change or a change in the landscape, a lot of these companies can kind of take advantage of what's happening here. And that's what they're doing. So some of them are trying to differentiate by offering more transparency. Some of them are offering better encryption. Some of them are offering kind of a legal framework with what they say they can respond to and what they can do. So I think really it's just become a more educational issue, both for customers and for the suppliers. So, aside from that, aside from the kind of the large mega vendors in the U.S., you're also seeing opportunity from international companies like, say, Deutsche Telekom, which, let's say if Germany was compelling them to only purchase things from their own country and they couldn't use things from the U.S., then of course they get to take advantage of that.
Norman, do you think the latest revelations or, all this information that has now come to us, do you think it's going to change the way consumers interact with these tech companies, or perhaps change the patterns in the way we which use their products and use their services?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I suspect not. So what I mean by that is, look, I feel this is more kind of an educational, eye-opening experience. As I said earlier, whether it's some government entity or whether it's just a group of hackers somewhere else, privacy and security are always going to be very important, especially when dealing with cloud services. I think obviously it's forcing customers and suppliers to kind of take a look at how they can better safeguard their data and kind of figure out what they need to do that. So if anything, it just kind of forces them to re-examine the issue.
Norman, really quickly before you go, I want to get your sense on how do you think the international competitors are going to react to this? What is their marketing or business strategy to perhaps move into the space that Google, Facebook, Yahoo could potentially lose?
Yeah, so I think if they have any advantage at all, it'll be through regulation. So if you've got a country that then mandates that companies must only purchase or use supplies from their own country, then of course there's kind of a built-in advantage. But the reality is very few international companies kind of have the breadth and the resources that these US mega vendors have. So it'll be difficult to kind of match what can be offered. So yeah, there might be some incremental benefits going forward as kind of the reaction comes through, but it still becomes a wait-and-see game.
Great. So the Titans still rule the roost. Many thanks, Norman Young. That's Norman Young, Senior Equity Analyst from Morningstar, joining us there from Chicago.